I'm so happy to welcome you all to our next panel, Snackability, Deep Reading End. We have a little change because we have to find a new vocabulary. This is one of the questions that this panel will talk about. In this changed world of critique, where are the new expectations to easy consumability and language as a language play? Ulrike Draesner is a polyglottal person between all the different genres. She is an author, as in a review has read. She poeticizes the world. She is very humorous and has a broad spectrum of topics. I want to talk about her book published in 2021. Since 2019, she is a member and she brought this panel into life. Mara Delius, she wanted to be here today, but her child unfortunately fell sick and she cannot be here. She is a poet, critic, and we have here Berit Glanz. She is a poet and a translator, and she is also active on 55books.de, a blog on the internet. It is an alternative to the feuilleton. Linn Penelope Micklitz is author and also director of the German Literature Institute in Leipzig, and she works for the city magazine Kreuzer, also with a podcast. And we also have here with us Jutta-Müller Tamm. She is a literature scientist at the Free University of Berlin. She didn't only study German, but also philosophy and film media science. For 5 years now, she has been working in a research laboratory, working on treating art beyond criticism. We are looking forward to your discussion. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so happy that we are here together today, and we will be talking about the possibilities of criticism in the treating language. Criticism itself is language and is also written in language. I think that criticism builds up rooms. It doesn't only open them, it builds them by talking about literature and criticism. And I want to start with by building up a little room. I will lose a few words before the panelists will speak. The old Greek word of criticism has two meanings. Criticism is giving your criticism, finding something good or bad, but you can also understand it as interpreting, explaining, contextualizing. And that this is the first tension that is inherent to the word criticism. And there is a second one. In 1995, I published my first book, and the world of literary critique was very simple. I publish a book, and afterwards I shut up. Then the others talk. So there was a clear direction. I can't really talk back. I can't defend myself. The worst case I can remember, a critique reviewed my novel. She liked the first part of the novel and then didn't understand why in the second half the characters are all in South America, and I said I don't understand either because they are not. So the critic paired my first half of the novel with another one, with the second half of another novel. Today, the position for the authors and the critics and also the audience changed. And my first thesis would be criticism in crisis, I don't know, critique. Authors talk back on all different kinds of channels. They have the possibility, and in the middle we have criticism, and it was split up in different channels and formats. And in the third position we have the audience. The audience also takes their part in criticism, and they can read in the public. Of course, the authors and the public can enter into discussion on different levels. This is the second tension, I would say. And the third one, I would say, is the language of criticism. We have talked about a lot of different forms of criticism, but there is a change in the media between the art form and its criticism. But in literature, this is different. But I'm not sure if this is positive. Today, we want to talk about changes in function of the public, institution, society, different changed roles and hospitality and reading, and also the possible future possibilities for criticism. When entering into contact as a human with a book, if this also includes to reflect on your own standpoint, I think this is a great opportunity to ask the panelists to present themselves with a short statement. We will start with Berit Glanz, then Linn, and then Jutta-Müller. Thank you so much, and a warm welcome to the three of you. Okay, I will start speaking now. I have the light here is very bright and I can't really read, so I will speak freely. I found out something peculiar about myself. When I read books and they describe facial features, I mimic these features. This is a problem when you're reading on public transport because you look funny. But what I like about it is that I found out that I'm not the only person. Because on TikTok, this is a kind of trend. If you are on TikTok and if you look at a lot of videos that are about literature, you will probably come about you will find a genre of videos who do this. I will describe one video. One woman sits there, reads a book, and then mimics these facial features. For example, if somebody smiles, she also smiles. And while doing this, you see that these are tropes that are weird and they don't really work in the real world, because a lot of these facial features described in literature don't work in the real world. So you can see language here is a cliché. So this is a sort of critique. And this happens a lot on TikTok with genre literature, so science fiction or youth literature. But why am I telling you this when this panel is about the future of critique? Well, more than 80% of Germans use the internet for almost 3 hours per day. And the younger the generation gets, we have very high numbers of users of social media. Between the 15 and 20-year-olds, they look at a lot of, they watch a lot of videos, not only Amazon Prime or Disney Plus, but Instagram and TikTok. So for those who are younger than 30, we have the social media in their daily life. The older the people get, the less important social media gets. They are also, when criticizing texts, we have to look into social media because they are also looking at these literature texts. And these platforms have a very productive environment for this literature criticism. On TikTok, one genre of videos that are treating romance tropes have 115 million views. So this is a very lively discourse, very international, and they work a lot with parodies. For example, mimicking the facial features of the characters in the novels. So the public figure changed, and in the social media we have active consummation. So we already heard the term prosumers, taking part in what you consume. Of course, I look a lot at literature and a lot of novels or texts, but also authors are being developed into memes. There are a lot of memes about the bug from Kafka. So we analyze art in a lot of different forms that are also critical, and we have different groups with their own values and their own criteria, and these criteria are treated on social media. Okay, this is what I will start with. I look at social media and how social media treats literature and texts. And now I will say what, in my opinion, professional critique could be for people who are on social media. And I think it is contextualization. By contextualizing you can be an intermediate between the different genres. But in order to do so, critique has to get social media involved, but also get used to the codes on social media. They are parodies, they are memes, they are content analysis in images. So you have to work with these codes and then maybe use them as critique. And this is my viewpoint. A warm welcome also from my side. I will tell you the truth. I am 30, female, have always been reading novels, but no classics. I'm more melancholic than intelligent, but I know the right codes. I didn't study literature. There is nothing that I love more than reading. I have always the fear not to confirm with the texts. Without the post-criticism, one like me could not be considered a literature critique. The best thing that could happen to a text is criticism, but text is not criticism. But if I say that criticism is the best that could happen for a text, I do not mean it's the best for the author, or maybe it's the other way around. The text is the best thing that could happen to the critique, or at least that's what it feels like when reading. So putting the text into question is treating the text. I would rather think that the stories have always been there, and that they have always been in language, and that they're just cut out of the material of the language. In the end, there is always the question of the Abraum. Where did it go? How was it removed? I cannot give the answer to this in 280 words or memes. I do not have social media. I talk about literature, not by myself, but the swarm intelligence can give the answer. Reading books more than once over the years shows me how they change me. Literature criticism is in crisis. This does not mean anything else but that it is still alive. Something that is alive changes and is changed. And a tweet can also include a deep reading. Virginia Woolf said, "It is not about changing others."
You feel overwhelmed as a reader, listening, being silent when the text speaks to you. And I'm leaning out of my comfort zone. The text is a gift, and the classical form of literary criticism is saying thank you to this. In the Zeit, Ilse will, who never subjected themselves to the writing process, who never knuckled down to sharpen his or her wits, should not act as a critic. Or in other words, you need to write about things that others have written. Distrust and dejection is something different from hate comments. What can you do? Losing your fear of the judgment and leaving the literature as untouched as the judgment. Hello, everybody. Also from my part, I represent the part of literary studies. I have never written any review of any book, nor have I published anything apart from academic writing. But I think this is not the point here. And I'm doing what literary studies do, because in cases of doubt, we take a tertiary position. So we bend over texts that others have written over other texts. So I bend over others bending over text. What I heard just from Berit Glanz was very surprising for me. I know this is a reaction video. I also know this in the way that somebody is recording themselves while they are watching another rather loathsome video. We have a number of such reaction videos where people try to capture their reaction of repugnance or shock. If you bring this together with the question, is that literary criticism, or what would it be? Would it be something like criticism of the work of art? Well, this is a first starting point for this huge topic. What's the effect of social media on criticism? Your statement. I think this was an Insa Rink quote. No, that was coined by myself. being silent when the text speaks to you. I think this is a counter model to the previous attitude to be able to react directly from a gut feeling, filming oneself all the time without further processing, dumping it anywhere. That would be, in cases of doubt, the model of social media. Well, of course, what's opening up here is the entire field of the serious criticism, so to speak. I would be interested to learn from you. How do you localize yourselves in this field, which is an enormous range of phenomena? Let me please interfere before moderate weiter. I would like Jutta. Okay. Literary studies in view of literary criticism. Well, you can disentangle this in various ways. One thing is in the realm of researching literary criticism and researching canons. What are the standards or the yardsticks by which literary products are judged, how a canon is generated, how it is given down, handed down, and how is it changed? This is one part. How, what is the relationship of literary studies towards literary criticism? Well, here we have a relatively small, while still increasing field of literary studies. Literary studies is still dominantly informed by historical perspectives, but to what degree is literary studies an active participant in a literary field? To what degree has it a determining role or co-determining role in what is in and out? What is the discursive power of literary studies? What is the discursive power of the cultural pages of newspapers? Well, when it is about contemporary literary studies, these two fields are very close to each other. Leaving apart the question, what is the stance of literary studies towards literary judgments or ranking? Well, I do so by selecting the subject matters. But what is the ranking or the position of this? And without falling prey to the illusion that literary studies are free of values, we would still say there are different roles. The direct judgment is not a thing envisaged in literary studies. While in criticism, this is certainly a standard practice. I try to combine this and to play it back to Berit. You mentioned a very important point that has also reverberated in your statements. Selection is always an implicit ranking. Not necessarily will I have to reveal my criteria, but I will start here. I react to something that appeals to me or seems relevant to me under certain aspects. Now, what I'm driving at is denoted by a term used by Berit, professional criticism. There is a variety of criticism that have shown through these statements, these reaction, smiling on TikTok. Is that professional criticism or is it prosuming? It's just fun. I'm doing this for fun. I'm producing a parody. I'm talking to somebody else. Yeah. Here we see the formation of your genres. What would be my proper question is, where do you take your authority from? What belongs to the current understanding? If I take the entire huge area of talking and discourse about literature, well, I would drop this. Well, these are not reaction videos because they do not happen during the act of reading. They are quite diligently curated. These are not, although I find reaction videos utterly interesting because you can learn so much about affect or instantaneous emotions, but I feel tempted to say professional criticism happens wherever you are paid for it, because money gives you the freedom to delve into the inner workings of any subject matter. But here it becomes interesting, because this form of social media criticism is quite successful through Patreons and crowdfunding, because people receive money for the way in which they deal with these subjects. So I would say this is professional criticism too. Anything that gives you an economic reward, and it becomes professional because they earn their living. But then this division would no longer hold, because professional criticism would not only happen in print media but also in social media. Interesting. So you are saying professional criticism requires time. Do you share this view, Linn? What this so Water and Bread, a podcast for critical, for literary basic needs. Do you earn money with it? No, I don't. I find this a very exciting aspect. I thought of the fees for literary criticism. Somebody who has a good run through Patreon, would earn more. Nonetheless, it's the thing I do to earn a living. I find this interesting. When we talk about government funding, this podcast eats up much time to prepare it, to read it, because although it is a discussion, it is prepared, it is made up, it is scripted, what's going to happen. And we do have funding for such projects, even good funding. You need to submit an application. I think this belongs to this factor of time. You also need a certain expertise. If you do not know where the public funds are available, that do exist in literary promotion schemes, and at times they are not even depleted. So these are barriers. These barriers may be opened, but only under certain quid pro quos, know-how or expertise. Where do I get money from to buy time? What about the know-how concerning the subject matter, literature, or contextualization that you mentioned? Where does it come from? This would also be a part of professionalism? Well, let me state this clearly. It has always happened as a sort of autonomously autodidactic. I did not study literature. I studied philosophy. Anybody who does not know what to do on earth studies philosophy. It does not mean anything. I studied literary writing or creative writing at the Literaturinstitut. My feeling was always I have too little knowledge to become a professional critic. So I had to catch up. I had to become acquainted with all this to make up the lost time. Yes, of course, you may specialize right away from the start according to what you are considering as a literary critic. And this is certainly the expulsion from paradise. You can never... There is such a plethora of literature, you can never read everything. With a certain specialization, you can reach a degree of expertise on a small field or on a large field, although you do not have a classical formation or training. Berit, how did you call it? Romance fiction. Romance tropes, tropes that happen in certain romantic stories. Romance is a genre, but also intermediate, the new adult and all those things. There are people who simply do not have any background in literary studies, but they have read all those books very diligently. So it's a sort of expertise that can be gained through various channels. We have touched upon huge forces: economics, finance, the economics of time, the various sources of knowledgeability. After this discussion about the way in which books are read, how can I approach such a book or such a text? Let's take the book. So I'm in front of the book. I remember very well when I started out as an author, well, there was a culture of suspicion. This is also an allegation of post-criticism against criticism. As author, you were always unable, and you always had to be taught the right thing. You were subjected to lessons. I saw it with colleagues. The critics always accuse you of doing anything but writing. I talked with a critic talking to Antje Ravitch-Struppel. You had here a grant for America. Of course, you have written a novel about America. And she replied, yes, I had this project. I wanted to write a novel that is set in America. That's why I applied for this grant in the first place. But the critic had not even come by this idea. So it's a general lingering doubt and suspicion, a culture of enthusiasm, of reading from a different attitude opposed to it. Post-criticism, I'm looking over to Jutta because I have detected something in the philological laboratory that you are running at the Freie Universität, the idea of a poetic critique or criticism, a poetic critic, because I've been told on behalf of the literature and some poets do reflect on this. Poetry contains also elements of its own criticism. That's the genuinely romantic idea. During the birth of literary studies or literary criticism, that the idea was that poetry can be criticized only by other poetry and poetry. What is called poetic criticism? Well, I cannot tell you consistently what it is. I can only tell you what the idea of this project has been or is. So to collect voices that lead to an undoing of all the routines that we have fallen prey to in literary studies, certain reflexes. Yes, of course, having been trained as a scholar of literary studies, yes, you become acquainted with a number of concepts and terminology. But you want to look behind this mirror, behind this screen or frame of those terms and the terminology that you have painstakingly acquired. This is catching up or picking up on something that has been debated, what you call post-criticism, or a certain animosity against those cultures of doubt, so that you always want to unveil the truth. You need to break down the facade. And these are the misogynist, the racist authors, the politically incorrect positions that are always unveiled behind the literary facade. But it can also be a final farewell to criticism altogether. So we have seen a new awareness in dealing with the toolbox of criticism and also with the approach of literary studies. Whether you would then also propagate enthusiasm, Well, it's not possible to end up with what Emil Steiger called, said, to understand or to encompass what we are encompassed by. We are collecting, we are tottering along our way, we observe things, and the claim is to unravel certain mechanisms. I like this de-routinization, elimination, and Emil Steiger, a reference to this scholar of German literature. We have this pendulum swinging back and forth, oscillating between the various speakers' positions. I want to go back to that what Berit stated very graphically in her statement, because this type of reaction to literature, be it criticism or whatever, or no matter how you call it, but dealing with literature. The special thing about the network or the internet is that you have a translation of linguistic terms, so images or memes or icons, whatever I want. The reduplication of language by language can be eliminated. That can be also a liberatory moment. That would be my question to you. Let me prop it up by one example. What is the language that criticism can speak? What do you notice in the field in which you work professionally? Because I think one thing has become clear: the media that are used and the format, a long or short story or whatever, can be also a co-determining factor. From my life as an author, the reception of my roman Spiele, that was published in 2005, and it deals with the backgrounds of the terroristic attack on the Olympic Games in 1972. There was a strong reception in the language-bound reviews, and also on television. If you compare the two forms, you wouldn't think that it is the same book that they are talking about, because on television it was also always about the televised aspect. We had discussions, talks, days in, days out. I had brought up this subject as one of the forerunners. It was about the accompanying characters, a love story that ended in failure, that triggered the research, if you wish to say so. I met with one of the critics and I asked him why he had eliminated the entire historic dimension of the book, and he looked at me with surprise, as if I had asked an idiotic question. He said, "Ulrike, you know how much I earn for this review? 125 euros. I cannot read your 500-page novel and then research into what you have been writing about." So the media and the economic conditions were determining factors for which work could be classified and could be assessed under what formats, forms and contents. My question to you is, how do you deal with that conundrum? What type of language are you looking for? What language can you use if you do not want to remain silent where the book is talking to you?
My answer is short, so I will start maybe, and then Berit can maybe talk about it a little more. For me, the podcast that I am doing since April is, and I felt very modern with this until I noticed that I have no idea what is possible. And writing about literature and speaking about literature, they are tasks that I am able to do. I am able to do this, while I notice that translation I cannot translate, and I think that is very personal. I am not spontaneous, so when I am on social media, that doesn't work. We don't believe it when we see you here. This is why the people are laughing in the audience. But I think that if I am well prepared, I can talk about certain contents, but being on point and being funny. I mean, I don't have a problem with this, but that is just not my cup of tea, and that is why I don't really know how this translation process that I think is very exciting and very important. Um, I I just cannot do it. I'm not capable of it. So I I like doing where I can doing something where I can show what I can do. So this was very quick-witted and fast and funny. So, but I am an author actually. The pixel tensor, and I think it is very interesting what I experience because I have been a literary scholar before. A lot of authors recite their books during readings like a non-fiction novel, and you are then questioned according to a certain topic. I think this has changed in the last 1 or 2 decades. There were more and more questions concerning language and also how to write a book. This is a tendency also in literature criticism to put books in bigger contexts and also to see them um, in the times they are written in. That is not a critique, but more of a tendency. And I think that on the one hand, the reason is that style criticism is very difficult and it's also a tool of power because it can be intransparent. I noticed that when I read books, people don't show the styles on examples because there is not a lot of good criticism of style, and I feel like the critique of sentences is very good for the discussions on social media, but this is a good space to maybe think about one sentence. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it a cliche? Does the image work? Because it's very short and interactive and you can discuss it. And I don't see a lot of that in literature criticism. I don't know if I think that's bad or just a statement. The old close reading style criticism is something else, is not the same as deep reading. And I developed new feelings, deep readings. What can you say about this? The same phenomenon that I can see, I would maybe frame it a little differently and say that there is a strong tendency towards topics. And in the end, this is a tendency to content or genres. They are more and more important, not only as genres and their fans, but also because people are looking for a certain topic and books are sold by saying this book is about migration or gender questions. So this type of labeling becomes more and more important, and also in the conventional, traditional literature critique. But I would say that this is an effect of social media critique and also the lay reviews that are labeled by concentrating on content, and also they are more emotional and more strict. They are conducted by also reading communities, for example, and they put more importance on the topic of a book, and books are read in a more referential way. The books are seen in the reality that they are in. There are different criteria, the realistic criteria and the aesthetic criteria, but the pendulum at the moment goes in the direction of the value of the book. What can I find out about reality in the book? So I would find a link here, and I think this is a common tendency, but in my opinion, comes from a pluralization of critique. But I think we can also find this in professional literary criticism. I would like to add another aspect that you have already been talking about from the perspective of an author. You become an expert of a topic, and this expert is also, you are an expert of the topic and then asked about the topic in the real world. I think that social media is not the only explanation here, but the bigger media construction where fake news play a huge role, and also the source of news or elements of texts, images are not always very well traceable. So here we have the tendency to the defictionalization and a politicization. The debate puts a lot of value on what is said. What would be my position if I would critique a book that that a person with a migration background wrote? I think it is important to look at this situation in order to talk about this. I want to ask a last question because we don't have a lot of time. I would like to ask you for a short but visionary answer, and then we would like to ask the audience to partake in our discussion. In your eyes, how does the literature critique of your dreams look like in 5-10 years? What would you like to work on more? How would it look like? I know what I want to say, and I think the best opportunity are discussions like these, but also hosting, because as a person who is writing, I think it is incredible to talk to other authors about what they are writing about. And the second thing that I'm thinking about, if I could wish for something, it would be to network everything what has been said about a book, so I can see everything, every tweet, every meme, every review that has been published about a book, that I can see them. Perlentaucher tries to do this, but I mean a real interactive map where every forms of literature review, maybe even a video of a reading where they have been discussing the book. You have to look at everything when you're dealing with literature critique. Thank you so much. This is a great idea that I will keep in my head. The map, there has been the map of poetics. But there was a project like this. Jutta, can you maybe give your answer? What do I wish for? Doing what I do, talking about literature with my students, but also when looking at literature, my wish would be not only wanting to consume what you know, but also the things you do not know, something new. That is what I wish for. And I think that at the moment, this is maybe lacking. Berit, at the moment, I I would wish for a tradition in Germany, the culture writing, like as you can find it in the USA, maybe technical feuilletons. But here in Germany, or in the German-speaking countries, we do not have this. And there aren't a lot of formats where you can talk excessively about a topic. I like reading review essays because I think it is interesting if a book is contextualized on a bigger spectrum, going beyond what the print media can offer. But the problem here is this costs a lot of time to write these reviews, and the time to write these reviews is has been devalued. Okay, thank you so much to you all. At the moment, I will open up the panel to questions, comments, visions from the audience. You don't have to have visions, but I mean, if you have them. There is a question in the audience. Thank you so much for this great talk. My name is Miriam C. I am a literary critique, but I fired up some tweets about this discussion, so I am in between of Linn and Berit. I would like to talk about the question from the beginning. Berit, you talked about the style communities on the internet that have their own value criteria for their type of literature. My question would be, how do you deal with this criticism? Linn, you said somebody has to read everything. No, you said you can't read everything. And my question is for criticism. If I know I am in a style community, do I read everything, or do I stay in my own community? I don't have the answer to the question. What would be the reaction to the fact that there are other communities that have different values than I do? Berit, I think it is very interesting because on Goodreads I follow the lay reviews, so what readers write about young adult fiction, and I didn't even read these books, but they are very emotional, and there is a lot of potential for conflict, and I think it's funny how they fight in a passionate way that I would hope for in different areas. So I read these criteria in a community that is not mine, and I think it is very helpful if you do that as a professional critic. Just look at your own way of criticizing and then compare it to other communities, and maybe you can see that your standard is not the gold standard. And at the moment on Goodreads, there are heated discussions that maybe split the internet. I would like to add that there has to be a room for the room to make criticism transparent for readers. If I don't know how much criticism there is, I might ask myself why in one medium this is discussed and in the other one another thing is discussed. There are so many descriptions of facial features, and I have to know what is the goal. And on your map, I would like to know how the people, what the relationships between the people are, because that is the dark secret behind reviews. How often have you had a coffee or a beer with the person that wrote this book, or are you maybe dependent on each other? And that's also questions that have to be answered. And here we are talking about the implicit power structures in literature criticism. But there was another question. You earlier said that maybe an author says, why didn't you research the historic dimension? I only have 150 euros for this. I don't have time for this. But there is a science on this, pronolatcher. That has been researched, but for natural sciences. There is a phenomenon that I want to look at, and he goes into his laboratory and he won't leave his laboratory until he found the answer to the problem. But what machines, what devices did he have? What is the research landscape around him? How many personnel does he have? How much time? But these, if you take these factors into account, if you take these into account, it is very important what the prestige is of the research project. I don't want to show the dirty side, which massively decides the outcome. If the author says, why didn't you do the research? We don't really think about it. Thank you for your comment. I think there is another question. It's a very short question, please, because the coffee break will get shorter and shorter. I will say something positive for the side of literature. If I get only 150 euros, I will not do the work in a good way. But we also have to talk about ethics. We sometimes stay in the theater for 6 to 8 hours and only get this and that amount for it. But we have a professional ethics standard. I would be embarrassed to write a text and publish it where I couldn't do my research. But these are very difficult. This is a difficult relationship. But I think we have to find a different solution here. The fault, of course, is here in part from the critic. The critic has a fault, but also the situation is at fault here. The media houses, the institutions have to play a role, and I would like to have had a representative from the media. That would have been interesting. But they do not like to to take part in these panels. But I want to agree. This is not about the fault of the critics, but what Berit already said twice: the devaluation of the work of human sciences. What do we want to pay for this, and how much time do we want to put into this? You said it, and we said it on the panel. We are we put so much time into this, but we get not paid for it. But I think it is very nice that we talked about this again. I would like to thank the three of you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your questions. And I would like to start the coffee break with this.